You going back in?
There's still men out there. God damn. When I go home, people ask me, "Hey, Hoot, why do you do it, man? Why? Just some kind of war junkie?" I won't say a goddamn word. Why? They won't understand. They won't understand why we do it. They won't understand it's about the men next to you. And that's it. That's all it is.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
I want to make it clear that the views expressed by our hosts are not considered the official stance of MBR Views. Remember, this is all about having fun and enjoying the ride.
Good knowing exactly where to go with the football.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice. If you have a podcast or potentially have a podcast that you would like to start or be interested in doing, please, by all means, there is a little QR code down here on the bottom of my screen. And if you're following me on TikTok, there should be a link in there as well, or you can always comment or send me a message. I can help give that QR code to you. Basically, go to mbr.org, and it kind of helps give you a better idea of what Military Broadcast Radio does. It also helps teach you, helps get veteran equipment, and most importantly, it helps them get their voices be heard. So I'm excited. We are a week away from NCAA 25 being released, the first college football game to be released in 11 years, and super excited about that. I have it pre-ordered, so I will be able to play a week from yesterday on Tuesday. I'll be able to play. But in the meantime, we do have a little bit of news coming out in the college football world, specifically in the Big 12. Now, the Big 12 doesn't typically get a lot of national recognition just because they're kind of the little brother conference. They're the conference now, especially with Texas and Oklahoma being gone. They don't really have any massively big brands that are there for kind of the taking to really say, man, this team is really carrying this conference. The Big 12 is more of a kind of a hodgepodge of teams that come together, as well as it's kind of equal. Everybody has a chance in order to win the Big 12. And now, thanks to the new playoff spots and whatnot, whoever wins the Big 12 is going to have a potential shot at going into the playoffs for sure if they end up winning the conference. So it's pretty nice to be able to have that. A few of the big news that came out. Now, one subject in particular I'm going to talk about, but I'm not going to go super in depth just because I don't want to make any speculations, anything like that. Oklahoma Sooner State star running back Ollie Gordon did get arrested last month for a DUI. He was actually charged with not only DUI, but having alcohol in possession of someone who's under the age of 21, which is unfortunate. He did come out in the media day and apologize for it. He said that he has learned from his mistakes, that everybody makes mistakes, and that he's going to move forward with it, which I think is a pretty good deal. The fact that he did actually man up to it, he came out, he said, look, I know I made a mistake. This is something that I need to fix and that I need to work on myself. And he's not going to let that hold him down. He's still, by far one of the best running backs in the nation. And it does show that while luckily and thankfully no one was hurt, he did learn from this situation. I think this is going to be something that carries on with him, hopefully, as he moves on into his future and whatnot, and into not only his collegiate career, but hopefully his NFL career as well. But one of the big news that I wanted to talk about out of the Big 12, and that's probably going to be our biggest topic of the night, is going to be the Big 12's potential for expansion. Now, I've talked about this a lot, not only on this podcast, but also on the other podcast that I typically join and I'm part of, Big Talk, that's B1G Talk. The fact that college football landscape has changed so much, and there's always now these people coming in for expansion. They want to try to get the next big brand. They want to get the next big team because everybody wants to keep their conference alive. Everybody wants to keep their conference going. You now have the Big 12 potentially looking at two of the biggest brands that are still out there that are actually looking to leave their current conference in Clemson and Florida State. Now, there have been a lot of rumors that Florida State and Clemson would either dart to the Big Ten or the SEC. However, there are now reports coming out as per, I think it's Pete Dellinger or Ross Dellinger, one of the two. I can't remember his first name off the top of my head. But he is actually coming out with reports saying that the Big Ten is more interested in Notre Dame and UNC, which that's for anybody that has followed the show for a while. And if you haven't, completely fine. I've talked about this quite a bit. Notre Dame is probably the absolute top target for the Big Ten just because it's right in the backyard of Big Ten country. Big Ten country is primarily Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. You have Nebraska, you've got Iowa, you've also got Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and now you have California as well as Washington, and you have Oregon. So the Big Ten covers absolutely everywhere, right? And they're looking to expand potentially south. But the other team that is there in Indiana, other than IU and Purdue that they already have, is Notre Dame. And historically, the Big Ten has had a lot of very good rivalries with Notre Dame. Now, in the past, the Big Ten tried to get Notre Dame to actually join the conference. However, Notre Dame wanted complete autonomy as far as control over its schedule, and the Big Ten was not prepared to do that. Now, keep in mind, this was also a few years ago when it was a different college football, it's a different Big Ten, it's a different landscape. That's why they actually ended up having basically a gentleman's agreement with the ACC of we'll primarily compete with most of our sports in the ACC. We really won't mess with the Big Ten much. Now, the exception with that being they did actually have their hockey team join the Big Ten. So there is a little bit of a footprint in the door for Notre Dame to potentially join. Now, the other thing that I speculated within the last couple of years that came out, so when the Big Ten restructured their media contract, they signed with Fox, they signed with CBS, and they also signed with NBC. NBC is the sole and primary media rights owner for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And now that that's the case, and they have the Big Ten there, they want to try to incorporate more of some of these Big Ten matchups and whatnot. So it is possible that that Notre Dame joins the Big Ten. I kind of hope that they do. But leading this back into Florida State and Clemson, I had a theory a long time ago that because of how the ACC's media rights deal is done, and for anybody who doesn't know, the media rights is basically ESPN pays the ACC to basically show their games. And if you don't want ESPN to do that, you have to basically pay out of your contract in order to essentially be a free agent. Otherwise, if you try to leave, not only do you get penalized, but ESPN owns the rights to all of your sportings, and they also earn a percentage of your revenue should you earn it if you go to another conference. Well, I figured with Florida State, if Florida State tries to leave the ACC, who's primarily owned by ESPN, and they try to go to the SEC, who is primarily owned by ESPN/ABC, ABC just being the sister station of ESPN, they're probably not going to be happy with the fact that they just had to deal with Florida State in a massive legal battle that they would have to fight with. And now they're trying to join the SEC just purely because they want to get paid more money. My thought was, okay, Florida State could potentially bounce to the Big Ten because the Big Ten doesn't have anything to do with the ESPN. And so Florida State could look at that as not only could we make more money and we could potentially earn that money back that we're going to have to pay, But now we don't have to worry about ESPN being involved in the picture. We just have to worry about Fox. We just have to worry about CBS. We just have to worry about NBC. But there's a lot of talks and there's a lot of reports that more than likely the Big Ten would not be interested in them because they're looking at not necessarily better quality, but they're looking at Notre Dame has more history. They're closer. They're still one of the top brands that are out there, and they don't want someone else to pluck Notre Dame out from underneath them. Now, for UNC side, they're more than likely looking at them from not only the academics perspective, but they're looking at them from a basketball perspective. UNC is probably one of the best basketball schools historically and one of the best basketball schools currently when it comes to college basketball. Now, for the fact that the SEC is apparently also not only interested in UNC, but they're also interested in the University of Virginia. A little bit more surprising because basketball, the University of Virginia is still very good. Not the greatest when it comes to football, but they're still potentially there. I just really don't get why they would want Virginia. But nonetheless, though, the SEC is apparently also not interested. Now, this could also just be we're not going to openly say that we're interested because we're not trying to add fuel to the fire type deal. And that's 100% understandable because to me, when Florida State and Clemson potentially leave the ACC, barring them being able to renegotiate a massive media rights deal with ESPN for the ACC or potentially another big network. And I don't know if Fox would be able to have the money to dish out to them in order to get that. But if they were potentially able to, I think they could, just so that way they could have their footprint in not only the Big Ten, they could have it with the Big 12, and they could have it in the ACC. Don't know if that will necessarily happen, but it's very much possible because, I mean, they were shelling out a good amount of money just for the Pac-12 before the Pac-12 dissolved. But it will be interesting to see if that's the case. And if Big Ten and the SEC doesn't want Clemson or Florida State, the Big 12 could very well be an option. Now, the only problem with that is the Big 12 is only paying their schools a maximum of about $40 million. And the SEC and Big 10 are paying theirs $80 million. So half of that. And I think that's roughly about what they make now. They may be taking a little bit of a pay cut if they try to join the Big 12. So they would have to potentially renew their media rights deal and earn a substantial more amount of money in order to do that. So I don't necessarily know if it'll happen or not with them being able to try to join the Big 12, but it would be interesting to see. It would definitely keep the Big 12 a lot more lively if they had Florida State and Clemson in, just because it would be a massive powerhouse move. But to me, it wouldn't really make sense because they would have to take a substantial pay cut if they do that. But nonetheless, I am going to take a quick commercial break on here. I am still going to be live here on TikTok. So if you'd like to join, follow me on TikTok at Inside the Hoosier Mind. You can also follow me on Facebook at the same name, as well as YouTube. And you can also find me on the Military Broadcast Radio, which is sponsoring this and hosting this for Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping them not only learn how to do their own podcast, start their own podcast, but helping them get equipment as well. So I will be right back here on Facebook anyway, and I will still be here on TikTok.
The fact that our patriotism in America is dwindling, I really wanted to start the American AF movement. Freedom is fragile, very fragile. It takes a certain level of intestinal fortitude to stand up and say and do the right thing to preserve the freedoms that so many have paid a large price for. About being in the military, and that recruiter said, it's not Biden's army, it's your army, it's his army, it's his army, it's all of our army.
American tactical. American as fuck.
All right, welcome back into Inside the Hoosier Mind. I am back here on Facebook, still live here on TikTok, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, giving veterans a voice. If you'd like to learn more, please go to MBR.org. That kind of helps give you a little bit better idea of what Military Broadcast Radio does, what their mission is as far as helping give veterans a platform, giving them a voice, as well as teaching them how to be a podcaster, helping get them better equipment and whatnot. So please check them out. They're a great organization. They're absolutely awesome. But we are back with a little bit of college football talk since it's about a week until NCAA 25 gets released. Super stoked and super excited for it. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, because I got absolutely roasted for this on my last TikTok video, was some of the college football rivalries and the fact that I didn't put people's favorite rivalries up in the top spots that they needed to be in. That's a them problem, not a me problem, because that's up to opinions, and everybody has opinions, and we all know what they say about opinions. I'm just not going to say it here. Nonetheless, though, there are a few teams that I wanted to talk about, and it's probably going to upset some people, but again, that's a them problem, not a me problem. There are 3 teams in the Big Ten that I think have really big potential as far as being able to make a playoff spot. And that's mainly being off of when I looked at their schedule here recently, I look at where they're going, what they're doing, and the fact that they do have a pretty easy schedule for the most part, with the exception of a couple games. I think these are a few teams that could potentially win about 9 to 10 games, and they're going to come out and potentially win, be able to win into a playoff spot now that it's expanded up to 12 teams. I'm going to start with Nebraska. Nebraska is one of my favorite dark horses for the Big Ten to potentially go pretty far. Looking at their schedule, and I apologize on TikTok that I don't have this pulled up, and I can't change my picture on this, otherwise I would. But I will walk you all through it nonetheless, just like I am here on Facebook and YouTube. So Nebraska's 2024 football schedule. They start out, they host UTEP, the Miners. More than likely, Nebraska is going to win that. Then they host Buffalo, Colorado. Now, I'm going to be honest. I like Deion Sanders. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't like what Deion has been doing in Colorado. I can kind of see where people would argue that he's maybe a little bit overhyped. He is a bit of a diva, and he is, he's a big name. But for all of those people that hate Deion, they must have not watched Deion back in the 90s and back during the time when he was with Dallas, when he was with the 49ers, when he was with the Falcons, when he was with the Ravens, even with Washington. That has always been Deion Sanders' personality. That has always been who Deion Sanders is. And I don't expect him to change as a head coach. That's how he was at Jackson State. That's how he's been at Colorado. He's a big name. He's a big brand. And again, people may not like him. He was successful with Jackson State. Now, there's a lot of questions. Could he replicate that success with Colorado? That's still a lot to be earned, and that's, still the big question mark in the air. He did manage to get them over the hump because the year prior to that, they won 1 game. He won, I believe, 3 or 4 games last year, which isn't a lot. That's still an improvement over what they had the year before. Now, I do think with Nebraska coming in, it's Matt Rule's second season as the head coach of Nebraska. He's going to be hosting Colorado. Both teams, I think, have gotten significantly better in that aspect, but I would put the talent-wise for Nebraska over I would Colorado. I think he has a little bit better of a shot now. It's going to be a little bit of a revenge game as well. And Matt Rule even came out and said it here recently on the Big Ten Network that, hey, I didn't really know how to play in the Big Ten. I didn't really know how to play and coach in Big Ten weather. Now he's got that experience under his belt. A lot of his games were close, just like they have been in years past with Nebraska. They have been a really close team. They've been really close to being able to win it. They've just been losing at the last second, and they can't hold on to a lead. So with Nebraska hosting Colorado this time, instead of having to go to Colorado, I'm going to give Nebraska the win. So that means they're going to start out 2-0. They then host the Northern Iowa Panthers. I don't even know who they are, to be 100% honest with you. So I'm going to say Nebraska is more than likely going to beat them. And then they start to get into, in-conference play with the Big Ten. They're going to host Illinois. Now, Illinois is going to take a little bit of a step back. They took a little bit of a step back last year. It will still probably be close. I don't expect this to be a blowout by no stretch of the imagination. But I do expect them to beat Illinois, going into 4-0 to almost in the month of September. They got one more September game that they have to do, and they have to travel to West Lafayette here in Indiana. They have to go just north, and they have to go to Purdue. Now, Purdue is another one of those. They're taking a step back a little bit. I know the new head coach, Satterfield, if I remember correctly, is the head coach of Purdue. Now, he had a little bit of a bumpy season. They had lost a lot of talent, a lot of really good seniors. Nebraska is going to be coming in. I think a lot of that continuity by then. Alaska is going to have a lot of Nebraska is going to have a lot of the momentum coming in at that time. So I could 100% see Purdue actually losing to Nebraska and them finishing September completely undefeated at 5-0. Then they host Rutgers. Now Rutgers might be a little bit more of a problem, mainly being the fact of Greg Schiano always has Rutgers pretty well competitive. And I mean, the fact that Rutgers, for the longest time, they have to compete in the Big Ten East. They have to face Ohio State. They have to face Michigan. They have to face Penn State. They have to face Michigan State, even though Michigan State the last 3 years hasn't been great since that 2021 season with Kenneth Walker. Rutgers might be a little bit of a trap game. I still have Nebraska winning, but I definitely think it will be 100% close. Then they go into their first bye week of the season. Now, when they come out, they have not necessarily an easy schedule, but they don't have a hard schedule either. They come out of their bye week. They have to travel to Indiana again. They have to go down to IU and Bloomington to take on the Hoosiers. I think Nebraska wins that pretty easily outright. I like the Hoosiers. I know they got rid of Tom Allen. It's kind of a new era down there. The head coach seems like he's pretty decent. However, I don't see Indiana taking that next step forward yet. I still probably give them 2 years or so before I would say Indiana would probably be able to compete up there at that level with them. So I have Nebraska coming in undefeated as they travel to Columbus to take on Ohio State. Now, let's be realistic. It's Ohio State, and Ohio State is one of the 4 teams that is favored to win or at minimum compete for the national title. So I'm going to give the win to Ohio State. I think that one probably will be a blowout. Now, a lot of this will also depend too on Ohio State's quarterback situation. Last year, about this time when they came in after the spring game, you had, was it Kyle McCord or was it going to be Devin Brown? And a lot of reports coming out of camp were both of them are about on the same playing field. It's not a great playing field, and both of them are playing the same. There's nothing to really make either one stand out. Now you've basically got the same thing with 4-year starter at Kansas State, Will Howard, coming in. You still have a Devin Brown, and then you still have Air Noland as well. Now, albeit he's a freshman, he could potentially get some reps in there. And I say that because they're saying a lot of things about Will Howard and Devin Brown that they said last year with Colin McCord and Devin Brown of it's about the same. There's nothing that's really distinguishing them apart as far as anybody having the edge over the other. So I'm going to give that first loss to them at Ohio State. That's not necessarily a bad loss. At the current moment, Ohio State's ranked number 2 in the entire country. And as much as I hate to say it's a quote unquote good loss, I definitely think it's possible for them to still, still be able to work with that. And shout out to Joel for also having me on the MBR TikTok as well. So if you like this on Inside the Hoosier Mind on TikTok, you can also follow MBR2, I believe. And Joel can correct me if I'm wrong. Or if you just go to the MBR2 Facebook page, I believe you can also get the link for that as well there. And you can find me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all that. Now, after Ohio State, they do get the benefit of they come back home and they host UCLA. Now, to me, UCLA will also take a little bit of a step back, mainly being the fact that Chip Kelly left to be the offensive coordinator of Ohio State. They're going to take a little bit of a step back. So I don't see UCLA being that big of a threat. And I think Nebraska is able to get back on track. I think they're going to end up actually being 8-1 by the time they go into their second bye week at the beginning of November. Now, the last 3 games, a lot of people have said this is kind of where Nebraska they think is going to struggle the most coming into it with 1 loss. Now, they have to go to LA to take on USC. Now, I know it's Lincoln Riley. He's an offensive mastermind. He's really good. I don't necessarily see USC being able to be kind of that powerhouse that they were with Caleb Williams. Now, albeit he got a better defensive coordinator this time around. He finally got rid of Alex Grinch. But what do we expect to see out of the quarterback for USC? Can he be the guy to lead them? And my buddy Mike, the Shy Kid, if you love everything Chicago sports, he is definitely the guy that pointed this out as well. I couldn't really name you a single player that was Caleb Williams, wide receiver last year, other than Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, and he didn't go very high in the draft as well. So it's one of those, now that I kind of look at it, I'm like, I don't really see USC being that big of a powerhouse enough to kind of deter me from saying that Nebraska wouldn't have the edge, especially, again, if everything plays out the way I think it is. Nebraska is going to come into this, what is that, 8-1? They're going to come in 8-1. They're going to be coming fresh off of a bye week. At minimum, let's say they're 7-2. They're still going to be in a really good position. And I don't necessarily see USC being able to top that. And I think USC is going to have a really rough first year in the Big Ten because they're going to have to deal with a lot of very good defenses. They're going to have to deal with Ohio State, to still deal with Oregon, Washington, UCLA, all the Pac-12 schools that are coming with them. So I have Nebraska being able to take home that win against them. Then they have Wisconsin coming to Nebraska after the USC game. Now, this is one I could see them losing. Wisconsin hasn't really lived up to potential in the Luke Fickell era yet. I know last year was his first year with Wisconsin. There was a lot of hype. There's a lot of potential with him. It's kind of tempered a little bit, but I've heard a lot of people really like what Wisconsin's doing. They really like what they're building. Wisconsin obviously been in the Big Ten West with Nebraska for a long time. It's always a really close game. So I think that one will be a lot closer than what we realize. And I think if there's any team that could realistically give Nebraska their second loss, I think it's Wisconsin. Now, the very last team that they would have to face, they have to go to Iowa to take on the Hawkeyes. This is another one that if they're able to beat Wisconsin, I don't know if they would also be able to beat Iowa. And I only say that because I don't really know what to expect out of Iowa yet with their offense. Now, obviously, they did fire Brian Ferentz finally, Kirk Ferentz's son, because he didn't live up to his contract potential, luckily. But again, I still think Nebraska will be able to win at minimum 10 games this season and go 10-2. I think they're going to be one of the teams that goes into the playoffs, even with all the SEC teams and all the potential talent out there as well. The fact that there's 12 spots, they could potentially take one. Now, I don't think they're winning the Big Ten championship by no means. I think that's still going to be, barring any massive disasters happening, I still think the Big Ten championship is going to be Ohio State versus Oregon. However, I do think Nebraska could still sneak in for a playoff spot at minimum. Now, they're going to have to travel on the road, but I still think it's possible that they win they at least go on the road to play in a playoff game nonetheless. But I'm going to take one more quick commercial break. Well, not one more, another commercial break here on Facebook, YouTube, and whatnot. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like the show. Please comment. I love to interact with everybody that comments on it. I'll more than happily have a conversation with you. And I will be right back as soon as I figure out a button to hit. All right, welcome back into Inside the Hoosier Mind, everybody. Brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, giving a voice to veterans. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, all of the above. You can also find me on the same thing. You can find me here on TikTok at Inside the Hoosier Mind, on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and the app formerly known as Twitter, aka X. If you missed the last part, we were actually diving into how I think Nebraska is going to do in the Big Ten. I actually have them as one of the 3 teams coming out of the Big Ten that I think could potentially make the playoffs. And I haven't looked at any of the SEC schedules yet. I am going to look at some of them and some of the teams that I think is going to do really well. But as it stands right now, I have Nebraska winning 10 games, and the only 2 losses, one for sure being to Ohio State, and one of the other losses either being to Iowa or Wisconsin, either one. Just depending on how either of those other teams do. I think Iowa probably has the better shot at that, just because I still don't know what to expect out of Luke Fickell's Wisconsin Badgers, but I've still heard really good things out of them, and I still think that they will eventually get the ship turned around, and I think he'll be pretty successful with them. The other team that, again, I always feel like they're kind of not necessarily overhyped, but they're always extremely solid in the Big Ten as far as how well they do. They just unfortunately can't get over the hump that is Ohio State. They can't get over the hump that is Michigan. And now this year, I think Michigan takes a little bit of a step back. I have Michigan actually losing 3 games to Texas, to Oregon, and to Ohio State. And I have Michigan going 9-3. I think Michigan just misses out on the playoffs as a result of that. But luckily for Penn State as well this year, too, they only have to face one of the teams they always struggle with. They only have to face Ohio State. So let's get into Penn State's schedule for this coming season. So they start off the year. They have to go to Morgantown to take on the good old West Virginia Volunteers in good old West Virginia and Country Roads. And I feel like this is going to be a really good game. I think it's really close. I've heard both sides that this could go really either way. I've heard arguments that this could go, Penn State. This could go West Virginia. West Virginia has a really good quarterback. That's an absolute, he can sling the thing with absolute no problem with Green. And then, of course, overall, that Penn State team is extremely talented. This will also be kind of the prove-it year, I think, for Drew Aller. Now, last year he came in, he inherited a really good Penn State team, but he wasn't the starter, so last year was kind of his freshman season, getting his feet wet underneath him and whatnot, actually playing in a lot of these games. So I think now coming into it, this will be a different story. But I'm going to have Penn State winning against West Virginia, even though I like West Virginia. I have them winning against them, starting out 1-0. Then they actually host the Bowling Green Falcons. I have them pretty easily beating Bowling Green. I don't see Bowling Green being able to upset them by no stretch of the imagination. Now, the unfortunate part for Penn State is they have a very early bye week. They get a bye week through their 3rd week into the season. Now, they do get a little bit lucky as they come out. They have to host the Kent State Golden Flashes. I have Penn State winning that pretty easily. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. If I have any Kent State fans, I'm sorry. I just don't see it. Then they have to host Illinois. They host the Fighting Illini. Again, I think Illinois takes a little bit of a step back. I think overall Penn State has the better talent, better team chemistry, and better momentum. They're going to be potentially 3-0 at that point. And again, for Penn State, they almost always fight of, we need to prove this, that we can beat Ohio State. We need to prove that we can be a competitor in the Big Ten East. So I 100% see them being able to beat Illinois. So that would put Penn State at 4-0. Then they come into, they have to host UCLA again. I think UCLA takes a step back with Chip Kelly being the offensive coordinator now for Ohio State. They've lost a lot of good players over the years. Now, I've heard good things about the new coach there at UCLA, but again, I don't really know what to expect from him as a head coach yet. So at the moment, I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I don't think he can make that big of a turnaround. Now, if he can get an upset in Penn State in week 5, well, technically week 6 of the season, good for him. I just don't necessarily see it to start things off. Now, they do face the other Los Angeles team, but instead of hosting them, they have to go to USC. Again, even though Lincoln Riley is a really good mastermind as far as offense goes, I don't know what to make of this USC team. Post Caleb Williams, they didn't have a lot of wide receiver talent last year. I don't know what to make of them this year. And again, is that USC defense still as bad as they have been for the last 2 years under Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch? Albeit Alex Grinch is gone, are they still as bad as they at least looked initially? So that'll be interesting to see. I still have them beating USC, though. Then Penn State actually goes into their second bye week. And then basically at the end of October, they have to go to Wisconsin at Camp Randall. This might be a little bit of a tough environment for them. Wisconsin is always a tough place to play in if you have to go there. Again, I think Luke Fickell can potentially turn the ship around and right it. But it'll also depend on a lot of Wisconsin's momentum, how well they can do. Now, I think Wisconsin has a potential shot at doing pretty well in the Big Ten this year. I haven't looked at their schedule, but I don't know if they're going to be able to hold off Penn State. But again, this might be a bit of a trap game. But for the moment, actually, I might have them losing because looking at these other games, I don't know if they might lose another one. So if Penn State's going to lose a game, it's going to be at Wisconsin, not necessarily a quote-unquote terrible loss. Then they get to host Ohio State. Not a bad thing, but I think Ohio State beats them again. The last few times, Penn State has kept it really close. I believe it was either last year before last. It was back and forth with Penn State and Ohio State. Unfortunately, Ohio State ended up actually getting the victory, mainly due to their defense being able to finally stand out for them. There's a lot of offensive sputters last year. Defense was able to step up and basically put the game away to get the Buckeyes the win over Penn State. But I think Ohio State is definitely where they're going to probably take at minimum their second loss, but for sure their first loss if they don't have any losses coming into this Ohio State game. Now, the end of their schedule gets a little bit easier. They have to host the Washington Huskies. I think Washington takes a massive step back, even though I know Jed Fish is an experienced coach. He's coming over from Arizona. They lost all of their starters from the national title team. They lost all of their offensive starters. They lost all of their defense. They lost their star quarterback, their three really big wide receivers in Roma Dunze, McMillan, Polk, sorry. So they lost a lot of talent at Washington. So I don't necessarily see them having a really good year. And I think they struggle their first year in the Big Ten, and especially against Penn State and having to travel to Pennsylvania to face them. Then Penn State goes to Purdue. Not necessarily worried about that. I don't expect a lot of big things out of Purdue this year. Then they go to Minnesota. Now, Minnesota may be a little bit more of a struggle. I don't really know what to expect out of Minnesota. They're one of those teams that they always come in very hyped. I think they had potential to win the Big Ten West almost every single year because, honestly, everybody had a chance to win the Big Ten West when it was division. But with how Penn State is, their potential, and typically how well they do in the Big Ten against everyone that's not Ohio State and Michigan, I think they have a chance to come home with a win on that one. And then they end the year hosting the Maryland Terps. I have liked Maryland the last couple of years. They've been really decent. A lot of good NFL players have come out of Maryland. They've had great wide receivers. Now, I think Maryland also takes a step back because they lost to Aaliyah Tungavailoa. He did declare for the draft. Now, he didn't get drafted. He signed as an undrafted free agent to, I believe, Seattle, if I remember correctly. So I expect Maryland to take a little bit of a step back as far as that goes. So I have Nebraska at 10-2. I have Penn State at 10-2 as far as how well I think they're going to do in the Big Ten this year. Again, I don't think Nebraska or Penn State is going to win the Big Ten. I still think that's going to be Oregon versus Ohio State. But I do think two of these teams with Penn State and Nebraska for sure could potentially playoff. For sure have a playoff. But at least on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, I'm going to take one last commercial break before I get into my final team as far as who I think is going to make it into the playoffs for the Big Ten. And if you like this, please like, share, subscribe, follow, all of that. Leave a comment. I love talking to everybody that's on here. And I will be right back.
Department of Veterans Affairs. For PSAs on the best services available to veterans, go to VA's new radio outreach page, news.va.gov/outreach/radio.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the last topic of the night. The third and final team that I have making the playoffs for the Big Ten, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, a lot of that is due to the fact that they still have Kirk Ferentz and they still have a really good defense. That defense has been solid every single year, no matter how poorly that offense has been. In all honesty, that defense has carried them to many, many victories. And obviously, they've carried them into a lot of the Big Ten championships, primarily against Michigan, but they still carried them in nonetheless. And I think there's potential for the Iowa offense to not be as bad as they have been the last few years now that they have a new offensive coordinator. So let's look at Iowa's schedule to finish off the night to see how well I think they're going to do. Again, I think they could also come out of this with a minimum 10 wins. They start off their year. They host the Illinois State Redbirds. Iowa, because I don't even know who the Illinois State Redbirds are. I think I've maybe seen that team once or heard the name, but I absolutely don't see it. Now, their first true tough game that they have every single year, because it's always at the beginning of the year, is the Cyhawk series. They actually host Iowa State this year. Now, if I remember last year, it was really close, and I believe Iowa State won, or Iowa ended up taking away the victory. I know Iowa State did end up actually getting one win here in the last 3 years or so. So that one will be close. I feel like that one's honestly a coin flip because it could go either way with it being a big time rivalry. They face each other all the time. I think the Cyhawk rivalry is one of the more underrated rivalries in college football. That because it's Iowa, because it's Iowa State, neither one are necessarily national media attention. It's still a pretty decent rivalry. Then they host Troy. Not necessarily worried about Troy if they have to take on Iowa. And then their first road game, they have to go to Minnesota. Now, Minnesota upset them last year. So Iowa, I think, is going to be playing with a little bit of vengeance when it comes to this season against Minnesota. Again, that defense should be really good. And if the offense is just a little bit better, this should actually be a pretty decent game. And it should be a really good Iowa team for them to face off against. So I'm going to give Iowa the win. They start off 4-0, and then they have their first bye week. Now, unfortunately for them, they do have to go to Ohio State, which I think they lose, barring Ohio State having a complete offensive meltdown. Now, I know they've kept it close with Ohio State before, especially in the first 3 quarters of the game. They keep it really close against Ohio State, but that Ohio State offense is just able to finally get the win, and the Iowa offense just isn't able to compete whatsoever. So it's that one's always really rough to watch if you're a Hawkeyes fan to see. So I think that's going to be their first loss. They're going to be sitting at 4-1, though, pretty comfortable inside the Big Ten. Now they do get the benefit. They host Washington, the Huskies. Again, I think Washington takes a step back, and I think Iowa was able to overpower and beat them for it as a result. So I'm going to give Iowa the win at that. They're going to be 5-1. Now they do travel to East Lansing to face Michigan State. I'm really excited to see Michigan State this year. I think Jonathan Smith was a pretty good hire. He brought a lot of his guys in as far as coaching goes. He brought Aiden Chili's, I believe his last name is hopefully enunciated. I could be completely wrong. Aiden, quarterback number 2. There's a lot of really good positivity. I did watch a little bit of the spring game as far as how they operated the offense. They moved pretty well. The defense did pretty decent. The defense being the biggest Achilles heel for them last year. As well as just inconsistency at quarterback play. So I do have Iowa winning this, but I will be interested in seeing how Michigan State does overall and if they're able to bring home the win or not. Then Iowa has the benefit of they host Northwestern. That'll be a pretty easy win. I like Northwestern. They actually did a lot better last year than what I expected them to. But just overall experience, the fact that Iowa is going to probably still have an amazing defense. I don't think Northwestern's offense can overcome that. So I'm going to give Iowa the win there. Now, a really other good rivalry, they do host Wisconsin. Again, it'll all depend on how Wisconsin does this year. Will they have the momentum going? Can they kind of get things on track? This will be later on in the season with only 5 weeks to go. I'm going to give Iowa probably the win in that. mainly again due to their defense. If their offense is just the tiniest bit better, they'll have a chance. Then Iowa actually goes on the road to Pasadena, California in late November, so the weather will be really nice there to take on the Bruins. Again, I already think the Bruins take a step back. New coach, new system, new players. It's going to be a lot different UCLA team. And then to finish off the year, Iowa actually has their bye week just shortly after that. And then they go to Maryland. Again, I already think Maryland will take a pretty big step back, having lost to Lia Tungavailoa, lost a lot of really good players. Now, I do really like the coach there in Maryland. I think he's done really well with Maryland the last couple of years. And they do have to go to College Park. So this might be a little bit of a trap game for them as well. But I do have them getting a win against Maryland. And then they finish the year against Nebraska. Again, I think Nebraska is going to do really well. If they do have, if there is going to be a second loss for Nebraska, like I said, it is probably going to be Iowa. So I feel like, honestly, for Iowa, there's 3 potential trap games that they could lose. I think one being Wisconsin, the other one being Maryland, and the last one being Nebraska, and the for sure loss against Ohio State. So at minimum, at worst, I see Iowa going 8-4. But for the most part, I probably have them also going 10-2, and you can pretty much pick any other loss that you think might happen other than Ohio State for who that second loss will be. But nonetheless, though, I'm excited. I can't wait for the NCAA 25 game to come out this coming next week. Super excited for that. Can't wait for college football as a whole to come back. There's so much excitement. There's been so many moves as far as the college football realignment and whatnot. Like I talked about last week, Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC. Technically, the 4 new teams in the Big Ten haven't officially joined yet, as far as Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. They will technically join on August 1st, just because their media rights deal ends then. Doesn't really matter because it's the off season for just about all of their sports right now. But for whatever reason, that's in the contract. So they're not going to join until August 1st. Same for the ACC. I know the ACC officially welcomed all of their new teams with Cal and Stanford. Officially, they only really have SMU joining because SMU already bought themselves out of their contract, out of the AAC to join the ACC. So nonetheless, though, I'm excited. I hope everybody enjoyed. If you like this, please like, share, follow, comment, talk to me, send me a message, whatever you got to do. I am on Facebook at Inside the Hoosier Mind. Same with YouTube and Instagram. I'm also on TikTok, which I'm live on currently at Inside the Hoosier Mind if you're a big TikTok person. And if you can't find me there, or if you don't like me and you want to actually hear other good veterans do a podcast, you can go to Military Broadcast Radio. There is a little QR code here on my Facebook video that you can scan to learn more about them, or you can go to mbr.org. A lot of great veteran podcasters, especially if you're struggling with anything mental health wise, if you just need some positivity in your life, if you just want some cool people to talk to and kind of tell some really cool stories about and just talk with, they're a fantastic group of folks to be able to work and talk to. They will definitely be able to help you in whatever way that they can. Appreciate all the love and support, and I will see y'all hopefully next week. Everybody have a great night. Peace.
That's the show for today, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with an all-new show. And remember, you can listen to us again and again. The podcast of this radio show is available right after we go off the air tonight, anywhere that you can get your podcast episodes. And thanks for joining us today. I'd like to take a moment to talk about something close to my heart. Military Broadcast Radio is doing incredible work to support our veterans and bring their voices to the world. They rely on your generous donations and your dedicated volunteer hours to make it happen. I encourage you to consider supporting MBR in any way, form that you can. Use this QR code that's attached to the picture, or you can go to our website at mbradio.us. That's Mike Bravo Radio.us to learn more about how you can donate or volunteer even just an hour a week from your home. Help make a difference in the lives of our veterans, because once again, we're all here for you and not for us. We're giving our veterans a voice.